All right, this is a response video to Red Wine 4545. It's still on the general subject of meaning, and start off with suicide, but it's progressing into the other side of that, is that in finding purpose, do we find legitimate purpose? Do we, as he used the analogy of a narrative for your life, I guess I would say something, just because I'm always imposing some sort of science on everything. To me, it's more like a blueprint for living, or a scheme. And I've sort of expressed that my major concern is that the scheme ultimately has to be legitimate. It has to honor the truth in principle in the end. I mean, you can compromise the truth in its pieces, in its components, but when you add it all up, it must honor the truth. It must not be a lie. It must not be it must not violate the rules that in the end say that you know, there is this equation, as again I'll come back to, this equation that makes a life productive, minimally efficient. We have to leave the world better than we got it. And I would claim that there are narratives that make people happy. I mean, they live a semi-content life, but that their narrative is very destructive in its social implication. And so that's the category I would put religion in, is that people can live an honorable, decent, happy life. It's not even necessarily a selfish life, but it's a, you know, they can indulge what they need to indulge in. They can be gratified. But in the end, the values compromised in the end, the taboos, the oppression, the negatives of that philosophy, of that dogma, intolerant dogma, creates a social implication that's very negative, because it does isolate people. It almost extricates them from society, and it also creates excuses for war and hostility and anger and passions that we really don't want to encourage in people, but certainly not to validate, you know, as an ism, a national ism, or a, you know, protect the faith kind of approach. You just end up with an inquisition, something that's just so defensive of the narrative that you destroy everything that it possibly could produce. And so anyway, once I got thinking about this, you know, there's the Mother Teresa thing's been floating around out there, you know, that she sort of lost faith in the end. And I always sort of had contempt for Mother Teresa, just because I saw the mother part. I saw this caring person, intensely caring. And because of her narrative, she could find an excuse for suffering. You know, she could just, Jesus loves it. You know, you're feeding Jesus by suffering. You know, Jesus is horny for your suffering. And that was sort of the philosophy, and it made me want to throw up. I mean, it was just, damn, you know, there's no, that is sick, depraved, insane. And so now, obviously, I have a different perspective, and I feel a great empathy for her, as she struggled with a narrative that she couldn't make sense of. All she knew is she cared, and she didn't know how to write a blueprint for that concern that was honoring something honest, and that was, in truth, as productive as she wanted to be. She wanted to cure a disease, in a sense, and all she was allowed to do was treat symptoms. And I think that was a great frustration for her. And so, like I said, now I've acquired some empathy and some appreciation that she did struggle with the raw ugliness of the narrative, the story, the explanation, the context that she had applied to the world, that the story told her that this is what it meant. But when she had to live it, the story made no sense. And that's the trap. That's the thing. That's what I'm sort of getting to, is that there's this trap, is that we start the bullshit. Where do we stop the bullshit? And I've sort of, in my videos, tried to point out, I mean, I use this, it's a little bit vulgar, but I mean, to me it's a good example, in just the sense that we have this raw narrative that nature imposes. I mean, there's just nothing like an erect penis. If you ever experienced one, I mean, it's this thing that just demands attention, and it changes perception. I mean, it creates perception for you. All of a sudden, things mean something. Things that necessarily don't mean anything mean something. This creation of desire, you feel it control you. You feel it possess you. And there is tied into that, because we are sophisticated animals, conceptions of beauty, and they are painfully powerful. I mean, they are so controlling, and it's not even controlling is not the right word. They have that magnificence, that perfection, that quality, and you become lost in it. You become it's this beautiful, perfect fantasy. It's almost like a great movie or something. I mean, something that just completely pulls you in. Something that just this art, or the sheer, the raw beauty of it, the symmetry, the power, great piece of music. I mean, all these things instill this different world we travel to, and it's a world of emotion and nuance, but it is, in an objective sense, just a delusion, just an illusion, a mirage, a contrivance, a thing built out of desire, subjective desire. We can pick it apart, but I'm not saying we should. I'm saying we should appreciate the rainbow. We should experience it and wallow in it and enjoy it. What we shouldn't do is chase rainbows. That's sort of my point. We shouldn't be looking for those aspects of life to be the guidepost in life, because then we get caught up in something that's just artificial, and we live a life that is false to reality. And so this is where we get to the dark half of the story, is that, yes, I think if we're going to look at life hard and real and do the cold science explorer thing, honor our intelligence to its maximum, and deal with all the questions that are out there, every single one of them, and get to a real hard truth. The real hard truth is not going to be a pleasant one. It's, nature is constructed, the universe is constructed out of bullshit. There is no intelligence behind it. There is no conception of beauty. There is no conception of purpose. It's a mechanical process, and it has created us incidentally through the mechanisms as they wind themselves out. And here we are, this aberrant, but we are a possibility, but we're still an aberrant element, to have all this intelligence and the rest of it, and to be in this bizarre circumstance, to be able to contemplate our own creation. And we have to honor that truth, though. The truth is that we are constructed of poor stuff. It's a flawed construction, and that we have to be mindful of that. And so we cannot just wallow in rainbow chasing. We have to realize that we have to put some limits on our delusion. We have to put some limits on our fantasy. Happily ever after is not an answer, because that's not what life is. Life ends up being a perpetual cycle of suffering. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of negative things. And we have to take real responsibility for how much we just play a game with life. We are going to decide how much suffering there is in the future. We have the capacity to control it. And if we're just going to be recklessly living, and we're just going to live sloppily and just chasing, you know, 9 zillion different narratives, you know, chasing their cheese. And that's why I use the rat maze metaphor, because we've really got to step out of the maze, and we've got to say, well, let's cut some walls down on the maze, let's modify the maze, let's make it a little bit more efficient. We can still have our cheese, we can still have a game, but let's clean it up. Let's not have such a sloppy game. And then at some point in the future, if we have to give up on it, then we give up on it. But let's be honest.